This week, I'm going to talk about the Mahabharata. I understand that some of my listeners are perhaps not familiar with the text, and that's why I'm going to present an introduction of what this text is all about. The Mahabharata is an ancient epic poem and the longest ever epic ever written. It contains over 100,000 stanzas and is equivalent to almost 10 times of Iliad and Odyssey put together. Written around 3000 years ago, the text is supposed to be written by a sage called Vedvyasa, but when we analyze this text, we get this understanding that it was written over a period of hundreds of years by many writers. And of course, before that, before it was written down in text form, it was transmitted orally from generation to generation. So that means it is much older than that. But the Mahabharata, it's not mere epic, it is a romance telling the tale of heroic men and women. Some of them are considered to be divine. It's a literature in itself, complete one, containing the code of life, a philosophy of social and ethical relationships, speculative thought on human problems and their solutions. And most importantly, perhaps, it has also a small section called the Bhagavad Gita, which once again is an essential Hindu text and considered as a separate noble scripture in itself. So you see, there is a lot that goes into the Mahabharata. But before we get to the story, before we get to the philosophy of it, let's just understand the context in which it was written and the purpose that it serves. And for that, we have to take a slightly broader look at Hindu philosophy so that we can understand the Mahabharata in the right context. And for that, we begin with the idea of dharma. Dharma, which is not only central to the core philosophy of Hinduism, but many other traditions, religious traditions, which originated in India, such as Buddhism, Jainism, and other traditions. So the question is, what is dharma? First of all, a lot of translators literally translate it to religion. But it's important to clarify that dharma is not religion. So religion, when we talk about it, it is a set of beliefs. But dharma is not really a set of beliefs. It exists beyond beliefs. So just like universe has its own order according to which it functions, let's say it has natural laws, and when we come to society, we have certain legal framework. So dharma too, it can be interpreted, the reality that is, or the underlying laws, they are interpreted in the same way. And when we talk about interpretation, we get to different ideas. For example, as I said, when we interpret the nature scientifically, we may come up with the natural laws. We may talk about physics. So that is an interpretation of reality, right? So similarly, religion is an interpretation. It's an interpretation of dharma. It's an interpretation of the metaphysics of the world. It's an interpretation of how things should be. So, for instance, Buddhism interprets this universe in a certain way, and Christianity also interprets the universe in a certain way. So both will prescribe certain suggestions, so and they will come up with their own truths, And therefore, they'll have differences, they'll have similarities. The idea here is to get to the truth, to understand the reality as it is. So, that reality is dharma. And if it is interpreted in different ways, if Hinduism is interpreting it in a certain way, Buddhism is interpreting it in a certain way, that's fine. That's just the interpretation. But the concept of dharma in the wider sense, it's applicable to almost everything around us. So talking about the natural laws, we can talk about the questions of the physics. How does the moon rotate around Earth? How does fire create smoke? How do hydrogen and oxygen combine to form water? All these are parts of the natural laws or natural dharma. Similarly, when we turn from is to ought, that is how things should be, what we should do, then also we talk about dharma. For example, how should a ruler or a government govern the state? So the answer is they govern it by following the dharma of the governance. Similarly, how should you behave with your friends? That is by following the dharma of friendship. How do you do your job? By following the dharma of the job. So dharma is essentially the very nature of a thing, of a particular role, and accordingly you act. You act in accordance to dharma. So that is the concept of dharma. And Mahabharata is one of the many ways through which we understand the concept of dharma. Especially, as I said, there are different roles that we play. We play the role in our families. You can be a mother, a father, a son, or a daughter. Or outside, you are friends, or you're working with somebody as employees or employers, or you're fighting in a war. So you have different roles, and accordingly, you have different dharma. So what Mahabharata does, it uses the power of stories, the power of narrative to teach dharma. In ancient India, there were different ways to teach dharma. For example, if you wanted to learn it through theology, through rituals, through prayers, then there were Vedas. If you wanted to learn it through philosophy, then there was Upanishads. If you wanted to learn it through practice, there were different yoga systems available. And similarly, if you wanted to learn it through stories, then you had the Puranas or the Mahabharata in them. So that is essentially what Mahabharata is doing. It's teaching you the concept of dharma through different stories. So therefore, at one level, Mahabharata is an epic poem which we often talk about. It is a beautiful form of literature. But on a more deeper level, it contains the philosophy of dharma. And the philosophy is presented in the most palatable form, that is, in the form of storytelling. And we'll talk about that story in the upcoming episodes.